Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 908B, and today's date is March 2nd, 2016, and the title of the episode is U.S. Propaganda Begins, U.S. Concerned About Syrian Government Attacks on Civilians. Now, before I get started, I just want to make an announcement. I placed an interview with David Morgan on the X22 Report Spotlight YouTube channel. So if you go over to YouTube, type in X22 Report Spotlight, you'll see the video there. Or you can come over to the x22report.com site. You can scroll down a little bit, look over to your right-hand side, you'll see the video there, and you can play it. Or you can go to newssentinel.com, same thing, scroll down a little bit, look over to your right-hand side, you'll see the video, and you can play it there. Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, the FBI and Apple, they're still battling this out. And we see during a House Judiciary Committee, Representative Ted Poe was questioning FBI Director Comey, saying that, okay, you want this back door. If you get this back door, will you use this on other phones? And the FBI says, yes, it could be used on other iPhones, which shows us what they're really looking for is a complete and open phone system that they can access at any time. Now, John McAfee threw in his 2 cents into the whole thing, saying that this whole battle between the FBI and Apple is basically a complete propaganda stunt by the FBI, and it's deceiving the public because they want to spy on every single person. He's saying if the FBI truly wanted to get into the phone, he goes, it is very simple to do. And he explained it. Basically, he's saying the Android phone, the iPhone, they're just computers. That's all they are. He said inside is a processor, which is a computer. It has an instruction set, which is the iOS, and all the applications you run, and the memory. And he says that the FBI wants Apple to change their software so that it removes the check for security, which makes it easier for the FBI to take your phone and basically see everything inside of there. Now, the encryption works when you're having communication back and forth. This is where they have a tough time breaking it. But he says all they need to do to get into the phone, you need a hardware engineer and a software engineer. The hardware engineer takes the phone apart and copies the instruction set, which are the iOS and the applications in your memory. And then you run your program called a dissembler, which takes all the ones and zeros and gives you a readable instruction. Then the coder sits down and he reads through. What he is looking for is the first access to the keypad, because that is the first thing you do when you input your pad. It'll take about a half an hour. When you see that, then he reads the instructions for where in memory the secret code is stored. It is that trivial. The FBI knows this. Apple knows this. Why do you think they keep the data centers locked up? This way people can't get access to the data centers. There's a reason for it. But we see the FBI is using this as propaganda. They want to make it look like it's much harder than it is, because their agenda is to spy on every single person out there. That's it, plain and simple. Now, the United Nations Security Council, they basically adopted the resolution for expanding the sanctions against North Korea. The sanctions imposed by the resolution are slated to affect multiple sectors of North Korea, and it's going to affect North Korea's economy. They're going to make all cargo going to and from the country subject to inspection and limit or prohibit the nation's export of coal, iron, gold, titanium, and rare natural minerals. The resolution also bans conventional arms sales as well as delivery of aviation and rocket fuel to North Korea. So they're really putting the screws to North Korea. They're provoking North Korea. They're hoping, and you can just see this, they're hoping that North Korea lashes out. This might be the wild card that they've been looking for. And they're going to be putting a lot of pressure on North Korea because, as we know, as this economy falls apart, and remember, all of this is connected. It's not just, there's the U.S. economy, then there's the European economy, and then there's war in the Middle East and other things going on in the Pacific. All of this is connected. This is why we see all of this happening at the same time, because it's a race right now as the economy falls apart to cover up this collapse. This is why they're pushing so hard to get some type of war going. They want one of these countries, and the players are the same, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Syria. They want one of these countries to do something. So this way they can say, okay, we're going into this country. They want another country then to come in and say, well, you can't just invade this country. We're going to back them up, and this will spark World War III. So they're doing whatever they possibly can to get this started. So we see the U.S. right now, and India, and Japan, they're going to hold naval exercises off the northern Philippines near the South China Sea this year. And what is this for? This is to provoke China, plain and simple. And the United States already has warned China of specific consequences that would follow Beijing for their aggressive move on the South China Sea. How dare China, if this is absolutely true, which I don't know if it is or not, because I don't see clear satellite imagery. I see the blurry black and whites they show us about jets and missile launchers on the islands. When they show me a clear 3D color version of the satellite imagery, not a pullback version from 1970, then they'll make their case. But right now, it seems like it's propaganda. So even so, let's say China decided to put air defense missile systems on their islands. Well, they kind of have a right to, because the U.S. placed missile systems encircling China. Now, if you were a country and you see this happening, what would you do? I'll give you an example. Here we are in the United States. If Mexico and Canada decided to put missile systems on their borders facing the United States, what would the U.S. do at this point? Well, this is what the other countries are going to do. Now, remember, I talked about bullies. I talked about provoking. And this is that poke that I've been talking about, where the kid walks down the hall and he gets poked many times from the bully, and the kid doesn't do anything until one day the kid says, I'm not going to take this anymore, and he lashes out at the kid, but the teachers only see the kid lashing out. They don't see the 27,000 pokes beforehand. So they think that kid who lashed out started it all. This is what the U.S. is trying to do in all these areas. And they do it very methodically, slowly, so no one is the wiser. And of course, the corporate media is not going to report on this. They're not going to tell you about any of this until one of these countries does something and they say we need to go to war. Now, we see the U.S. is pushing the meme that it would be a very bad idea for Russia to fly over the U.S. And basically, Russia is allowed to fly over the U.S. because Russia, the United States, and many other countries signed the 1992 Open Skies Treaty. Now, the U.S. flew over Russia many, many times during the Ukraine coup d'etat, where the U.S. overthrew the elected government of Ukraine, and Turkey, the U.S., Germany, Ukraine, all flew over Russia. Russia did not object. Now the U.S. is making a very big deal about Russia flying over the United States. We have U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency Director Vincent Stewart, who's in front of Congress, saying that we should not allow Moscow to fly over the U.S. This would be an intelligence bonanza and would give Russia a significant military advantage. Well, we all know there are satellites above every single one of these countries. They can see everything that's going on. So basically they're using this as propaganda. Can you imagine if Russia said to the U.S., you cannot fly into Russia using the Open Skies Treaty during the coup d'etat of Ukraine. How would that turn out at that point? Well, the U.S. would make a really big deal. Russia's hiding something. They definitely have troops building up. But Russia wanted them to fly in to show that there were no troops. Of course, the corporate media didn't report this. But we could see at this point the U.S. is pushing propaganda, demonizing Russia at this point, because we know as time goes on, they want us to understand who's going to be the enemy. And this is why they're doing this. Now, the U.S., they are bringing in B-52 Stratofortress bombers, which are usually kept in Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. They've been redeployed to Spain, and they said it's all part of an exercise. This has nothing to do with Russia. We just want them over there, and we might even leave them there for a little while. And we know every time they have an exercise, a drill, and they bring in these military assets, they never seem to leave the area. And this tells us that they are preparing and getting ready for some type of war that they're hoping to start. We see out in Ukraine, Kiev is making a big deal that 3 soldiers were killed, 14 injured, because there was a special operation in eastern Ukraine against terrorists. And they're saying that these terrorists in eastern Ukraine started to attack the soldiers while they were attacking them. And we could see at this point what they're trying to do. They're trying to gin up the idea that the people in the southeastern region are terrorists, and they're continually holding anti-terrorist operations, and they're going to continually take place throughout the spring, they said. So we can see what's happening. They're trying to push their agenda, and we see it's already starting. Now, Turkey has decided that they're going to ban German Defense Minister from landing on Greek islands. And they're saying that they do not want a helicopter carrying German Defense Minister Ursula von der Leyen landing on the Greek island of Lesbos, because they're saying that this is a demilitarized zone. We don't want the German Defense Minister there. And basically, the German official played a decisive role in the signing of the agreement between Greece and Turkey, according to which NATO ships would monitor the activities of refugee smugglers in the Aegean waters between the two countries. And what's very interesting is that Ursula was going to be accompanied by German journalists in order to record what was happening on these islands. And Turkey is not allowing this to happen. So the question is, what are they hiding there? Because what other reason would they have not to let the German defense minister onto the island with the reporters? And we know that Erdogan, when something doesn't go his way and he wants to block it, he basically shuts it down. Like he shuts down YouTube, he shuts down Twitter, he puts journalists into jail. And we can see he's still doing the same thing. He's a dictator. Now, Italy is going to deploy 8 helicopters and 130 personnel to Iraq. Italy already has about 700 military advisors attached to the Kurdistan Training Coordination Center. And we know what these advisors really are. They are combat-ready soldiers, most likely doing battle. We know the U.S. had advisors in Iraq and in Syria. And of course, they used the excuse that they weren't in battle, but they really were. The Italian government is also said to be considering sending further military assets, including main battle tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and artillery into Iraq to assist. Now, out in Syria, we see that the ceasefire is still going on. Russia's saying they're going to fulfill the ceasefire. We see that Syrian opposition groups are considering to join the round of talks. And it seems like Russia right now at this point is trying to bring these opposition forces over to their side. Because we see already that Assad is basically going to give amnesty to the opposition forces saying, listen, if you put down your weapons, you are basically forgiven for everything. You can even take a seat in government if you would like. Now, this is going to be a problem for the United States because they want the opposition forces, and Russia and Syria are trying to win them over. And we're seeing more and more of these opposition groups basically join in on the talks. So we see in Syria right now that the U.S. is losing their proxy arm in the Islamic State. The opposition groups are teetering back and forth, and looks like they're being swayed over to the other side. And this is going to be a huge problem. So the U.S. right now is pushing all different types of propaganda, saying that Syria and Russia, they violated the ceasefire. Russia says no, the ceasefire violations are coming from the other side. There's about 31 that are recorded right now. We see Turkey is continually shelling into Syria. They're saying that they're going after the Kurdish groups and the Islamic State. They're not firing on anyone else. But of course, as we know, they've been firing to keep the corridor over. They have been firing on the Syrian government, and they're taking advantage of the situation right now. And right now we can see that the U.S., they've come out with this new propaganda where they're saying they're concerned about reports of Syrian regime tank and artillery attacks against civilians near Latakia and Homs and Hama, as well as around Damascus. And this is coming from Mark Toner, the State Department spokesman. And we see at this point already that they're going to continually ramp up the propaganda because this entire ceasefire is a trap. At least they're trying to set a trap where they say Russia, Syria broke the ceasefire. This is why we can go to war. Now, will this allow them to bring in troops and have a full invasion? Most likely not. But we can see right now that the U.S., they have satellite surveillance, which is completely over this area at all times. Turkey has built up their troops along the border. We know Jay Johnson came in, helped set up surveillance. We know that AWAC planes are flying along this entire area, keeping an eye on everything. So they know exactly what's going on in all of these areas. And we see at this point that this is all being staged for the next phase. Now, hopefully, the ceasefire continues. Hopefully, there is peace, and the coalition forces leave Syria, they leave Iraq, they leave the Middle East, and there's just peace over the land. But then there's a problem. The petrodollar. If they allow this to happen, all of these countries, they will kick out the puppet governments. Some of them have already been fighting to do this. And they will sell the oil just like Iran, not using the dollar. And this is the main sticking point here. This is why the U.S. will not do this. Because if they do, we will blame them, the U.S. government central bankers, for this entire collapse of the system. And they're trying to stop this. Remember, this is their system. This is not our system. This system makes the central bank, the U.S. government employees, very, very wealthy, while the rest of the people suffer. Think about this for a second. Think about what's going on here in the U.S. and Europe and how many people are out of work. Think about how much debt there is, how many new taxes there are, how they're going after people who don't live in the U.S. but are still citizens but are working in different countries, and now they're being taxed double. They're basically putting the screws to the people. The people are suffering. Their system, which they want to keep alive, makes them very wealthy, allows them to basically get more and more real assets from countries. They acquire these assets. They get rid of this junky paper and ink. They don't want that. They want the real assets. And this is why they continually spread the debt across the globe. This is why they're not going to allow peace in the Middle East. This is why they've been preparing and getting ready for this next phase. And you can see all the pieces are being put in place. Everything is very calm right now. Everyone believes there's a ceasefire. But actually, if you look back in 2014, right before the elections of Assad, everything was very peaceful at that point, and the Islamic State, in July, came out of nowhere. Well, we knew what was happening. They were training them in Jordan. They were training them in Turkey, and they basically just let them loose into these areas and created a new terrorist group. But it was very calm because they wanted to see the outcomes of the elections in Syria, hoping that Assad wouldn't be elected. But once he was elected, all hell broke loose. We're going to see the same thing once again. We know the parliamentary elections are coming up in April. We're seeing that things are very calm right now. And we can see that they're moving pieces, getting ready very, very slowly. Corporate media is not reporting on it. No one is really reporting on it. But we see these things happening, and this is why we're keeping track. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.